Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
All right, welcome to the Pros and Cons podcast. And today you're having an unusual host giving you an unusual episode. We do have most of the usual with us. We have Ali.
Hello.
We have Paddy.
Hello.
James. And finally, we also have a Phoenix.
Hello.
So, good to see you guys. I'd just like to ask you, what have you been consuming lately? What have you been reading? What have you been watching, experiencing?
Moby Dick perpetually.
Okay, get out.
It's picking up though. It's got to the point
It
where
is.
Ahab. So Ahab has just announced that he's really here to hunt the white whale.
As opposed
Honestly,
to
What did they think they were doing?
well, they thought they were just hunting whales. They thought they were making money, but Ahab's like, no, this is actually a revenge mission. You might not make shit from it.
That is a good scene.
That's wonderful. The guy's such a poet. Like it's a long book, but man, he ties together so many beautiful ideas from like history and philosophy and just every corner of the human world into a book about whaling.
Yeah, okay, so I'm glad I know where you are now. I'm a fair bit in front of you, actually. I'm just up to the bit
fast.
where there's a massive section about the difference between a fast fish and a loose fish. And there's like a whole chapter dedicated to it. It's one of my new favorite chapters.
His fish taxonomy stuff is so good. It's wonderful. The whale is a fish, and I will not be moved on the subject. Whoever says otherwise is a liar. They don't know what they're talking about. And he makes a
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's good.
nice. I'm still going through Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, which is bloody brilliant. It's a great book. It's so different the way it is written. There's a lot of dialogue, but there's a lot of dialogue that is brought to you inside the prose, which was something I didn't expect to like, but in this specific book, I'm just loving it.
What do you mean by that? Like it doesn't use dialogue tags and just...
He will just tell you, she will just tell you, so he went to the priest and the priest told him to find a different plan. So then he went to the king, and the king, instead of having those be fat, time-consuming scenes, because there's so much talking going on in this book, it's really about royal politics in that time in the Tudors England. So I think it was a smart decision not to have every single conversation be turned into a conversation scene and just have these paragraphs that kind of push the story forward.
That's cool to hear that's going over well, because that might be, I don't know, it's kind of a permission piece for me to experiment with that a little bit more. I like that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, is that when it's called indirect speech? The difference being direct speech, indirect speech? I've heard those terms loosely, but never...
Well, indirect speech usually is when I tell you what Paddy told me.
Okay.
So Paddy said...
I guess it's this interpretation of the author's voice, or the whatever the in-world voice is giving us indirect speech of what happened. Yeah, no, I love the fine line between when that's exposition and when that feels really natural and poetic and beautiful, and you actually prefer those summary paragraphs over line dialogue.
There have been some times in my writing recently where I'm writing a scene that I'm getting bored with, and I wonder if it is boring, and that's making me think like, maybe I should just skip it. Maybe I should just describe what happens in the scene and not go through it. Like you don't need to have every single beat.
I think that's a mind-blowing realization that you get to decide. I don't want this scene here.
Yeah.
You're not the boss of me. I'm like...
Speaking of dialogue that makes life really hard. So I've had a go at watching the new Halo series. Just check out if it was any good.
Your tone says so much without saying anything.
Because I've played all the Halo games. I kind of grew up with it. I've never say that I was a massive fan of Halo, but also at the same time, every time They did that thing where a new game would come out, so you'd have to buy the new Xbox. So it was just this benchmark moment of, your gaming life is always associated with Halo. At least mine was, because I've always owned Xboxes. It's been in like development hell for decades if they were ever going to make a Halo movie, a Halo TV show, and they've finally done it, and it's God. There's great fan service. It looks really pretty. The visuals are amazing, but I'm listening to the words coming out of their mouths, and it's just such a shame the words aren't a little bit better.
Yeah.
Okay, so if 1 is like the Taken movie and 10 is like Sonic the Hedgehog, where is it on the video game movie spectrum? Sonic the Hedgehog is a fantastic movie, and I will die on that hill.
That's very specific.
I was trying to interpret this spectrum, but I'm like, wow.
Yeah. There's a lot going on in the middle. Looking at you, Assassin's Creed 2, but
the spectrum is just a flat line. It doesn't scale anything.
It's just a circle from Hedgehog to Hedgehog.
Well, it is in the middle, and you should watch it because Jim Carrey is knocking it out of the park. So yeah.
Whenever I dedicate myself to watching something that's not amazing, I usually justify it as, so I am going to watch the rest of this Halo series because I think there's a lot to learn from it, and I do like picking apart exactly what's gone wrong and why the dialogue bothers me and why the actors are just really chewing on every syllable they've been given is fascinating.
What I was saying, Paddy, was I like watching something that isn't working because I feel like I'm putting together why something else would work if they just changed a few things around.
Yeah, that's
kind of shows you're like, oh, they have 5 out of the 6 elements to make that work. This is what it looks like when you leave out that other element.
Yeah, that's fun during all sorts of films. I would have made it end like this. Yeah, I can't help but do that.
Phoenix, you were going to share with us, what have you been consuming?
Yeah. So my partner and I are, I'm rewatching. It's her first time through Downton Abbey, which is a delightful show. Brilliant timepiece. And then I'm also at the moment still in book 2, Lord of the Rings. I have like such a small amount to go. For those just listening, I'm holding up my thumb and my forefinger, and they're very close together. And then I'm also reading Harry Potter, the first Harry Potter book in Italian, which has been that's been fun. That's been interesting.
I love
that. Wait, yeah, you just dropped a bomb. You're reading Lord of the Rings for the first time.
Yes.
How do you feel about it?
I love it. It's right in my wheelhouse. I love details. I love slow progression. It's basically like if you like first of all, I love it when you read a book and the book is brilliant. And then you watch the movie and the movie's brilliant, but not because the movie did a play-by-play of the book, but because the movie also interpreted the same story well. Yeah. And like they made really great calls. And then if you like the movies, Lord of the Rings books are like the movies, but you just get to spend more time in the details of the world. Like it's like you get to spend time with the flowers and the grass and like really go through it.
That's very nice. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I'm kind of jealous that you get to experience it for the first time, but since I've read it like 10 times and enjoyed it each time, so
wow, it's brilliant.
You know what's my like? I don't know how to call it. I don't want to call it fetish, but I have read the Silmarillion like so many times. It's probably the least readable one of all the.
Yeah, that's its reputation.
It's like, oh yeah, tell me about these, these fake gods that you came up with while you were taking a shower. Before I go on, James, do you want to take over? What have you been up to? What have you been watching? Reading?
I've been reading The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. It's kind of like the spiritual prequel to Atlas Shrugged. And I'm quite a big fan of Ayn Rand, so I'm really enjoying it. I find it quite good. I love how she kind of sets up characters almost not like real people, almost as just embodiments of like a philosophical idea, and that's their drive. And then she just has
or easily destroyable strawmen.
Yeah. Oh, I take it you're not an Ayn Rand fan.
No, I read Atlas Shrugged, and it was very interesting. And where it was interesting, it was very interesting. Where it wasn't, it was just sort of her beating up strawmen the whole time. And I thought her characters were very flat. I know they're not meant to be real people. They're meant to be representations of ideas. Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah. I think if you look at her as someone who writes like a philosophical book, but without following the usual structure of a philosophy book, which tends to be a premise is set up and then a bunch of characters sit around, usually in a living room in Russia, kind of debate about the premise. And they're all really, what's the word? They all have a philosophy that they're completely self-aware of and really well able to articulate it, and they all sit around kind of discussing it, which actually I love that kind of thing. I do find Ayn Rand's take on it a little bit different and a little bit more interesting.
It's more fun. There's more action for sure.
Unconscious. Yeah,
she's an action philosopher
for sure. Yeah.
Well,
I love that.
There's some definitely some interesting books being read at the moment by the Pros and Cons podcast. Thank you guys for sharing. Okay. Super happy to see you guys. How are you on this lovely morning?
Good.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. They're all
Do
smiling.
it.
They're
Very
smiling.
enthusiastic.
They're not being held
Everyone was
hostage.
waiting for everyone
I
else to
didn't-
speak, you know?
It's our Easter Sunday, the day we're recording this. So I think
Yeah.
everyone's in
true.
like long weekend mode. So we're pretty chill today.
Still digesting the champagne.
So yeah, Easter,
Honestly, forgot.
Passover, Ramadan, it's all happening this weekend. So today we're going to talk to you about something that I personally sometimes get terrified from and sometimes adore, and that is the heart and soul of what this group is about, feedback. So how do you guys feel about this thing, guys? Feedback for your writing?
Good. Feel good. We all met as part of Writers New South Wales, where we all lived in New South Wales at the time. It was like a writers group where we met to give feedback and critiques of each other's work. We splintered off from that, but we still give a lot of feedback. It's absolutely crucial to what we do.
Yeah, for one,
Yeah.
I saw an absolute change in my writing style when I started engaging these feedback circles. So I probably spent, I don't know, maybe 6 months in isolation when I really got serious about, I'm going to have a crack at writing a manuscript, and just dove into the ether doing my own thing. Before I decided, no, it's time to hunt out other writers to see if anyone wants to read my stuff, and I'll read their stuff. And Writing New South Wales was one of the first places I went, and it was just changing gears. It was an immediate notice in the quality of my own work, and when you do have a very tight circle of people who give great feedback, then as a writer I found I was carrying them around in the back of my head all the time. So it's like, my friend Jay really hates it every time I structure a sentence like that, so I'm like, I'm going to fix that just like as I'm writing it. Like they're already preloaded voices giving feedback, just the more I do it. And I found that incredibly valuable. Maybe psychotic, but valuable.
That's not mutually
Possibly
exclusive.
psychotic. Now that we established that feedback is indeed important, I wanted to ask you guys, who do you go to for feedback? Who's your number one? Who's your number two? Do you have like a set order? Is there one person that you immediately go to, or does it change according to what you wrote? Obviously, we go to each other, but who else?
I would love to know if this is similar for everyone else in the group who is long-term partnered. But I know it's kind of common for us to abuse our partners as our alpha readers. Not necessarily, they don't have to be the ones that give us the, in-depth feedback, but they're usually the one, read it first, tell me it's good, and then maybe just let me know if it makes sense. I don't want to hear anything else.
Absolutely. Stephen King did something similar, I think, when I was reading On Writing, which is him writing about the process of writing, which is really interesting. I recommend it. He was saying he thinks you should pick one person and write primarily for them. and he chooses his wife. So whenever he's writing, he's got, like, to what you were saying, Ali, her voice in the back of his mind. And she's always the first person he goes to when he thinks, like, will my wife like this? Obviously, he trusts her point of view and he likes her taste. I think it's a good idea.
Just another point on Stephen King writing for his wife. I know that he also would watch her while she was reading it. And whenever she like stopped to put the book down, he would be like, what was the
That's
bit just
good.
there?
That's good.
And he was like, obviously, like, she has to get on with her day, but it was that moment that, like,
she's like, I just need to go to the bathroom.
Interest to go back.
When Stephen King does it, it's cute. When Stephen King does it, it's cute. When I do it on the train with random people, it's I'm trying to understand. That's just double standards right there. Okay. What about you, Phoenix?
I mostly go to you guys for kind of first pass beta type stuff. And then I do have an editor I use mostly for my children's books through a place called Greenleaf Press. Although I don't know that they're taking, last time I used her, she took me on because she'd worked with me before, but I know she's, I think at the moment they're not taking new people, but I know she wants to dedicate more time to writing. But so I use her for more professional, like I need like breakdown, like line by line feedback on this. And then I do use my family and my partner. But yeah, for general, like, do you like it? Does this make sense stuff? And also, admittedly, sometimes just for a feel good ego boost.
That's important. Yeah. Especially as
I'll jump.
Oh, you go.
Oh, no, I love that as the very clear distinction between an alpha reader and a beta reader, how they've got two very different jobs. And the alpha reader almost just needs to be your cheer squad, being like, yeah, you did a thing. Validation. Yes, I can confirm I read it and it makes sense.
I've read it and it doesn't make sense, which is something you should get out of the way before going to the beta reader.
Yes. Yeah. And then the beta readers are the trusted pool of people who are, I want you to tear this to shreds because it's ready for that. And that's what it needs.
We all use each other for that, I think. Are we all each other's primary source of like beta feedback at the moment?
Oh, you're more than that for me.
Matan.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you guys are absolutely
the alpha, the omega.
I use Daniella for my immediate feedback, and I similarly try to watch her reaction, because I don't believe you need to be a writer to tell if something is funny or emotional. So maybe they can't break down why something doesn't work, but usually if something doesn't work to a non-writer, it doesn't mean that it's not a valid feedback. It probably more meaningful feedback, because writers will sometimes try to understand your writing because they know where you're coming from. Sometimes it's better to go to someone who has no clue what you're trying to do. And if they didn't get it, it's probably not clear enough.
I'm a little bit spoiled in that my partner does voice acting. So I get him to read it out loud back to me is my alpha stage. So so I get to hear it kind of performed. I get to hear my sentence structures. So I have it on a screen in front of me and I'm highlighting everything I hate as he reads it. Just so I can know, I'll go back and I'll play with that. I love what you're saying, Matan. I think I've said this on a previous podcast, so I won't dive into it, but this idea that feedback, there's like the symptom, the diagnosis, and the prescription. And what you're describing is the anyone can describe having a symptom to a bit of to a piece of work. They're like, your writing made me feel this. And they're never wrong. You can't argue with someone that they've felt that way. And that's always valid and useful. However, we can decide, that's not how I wanted an audience to feel at that point, or yes, great, that's exactly how I wanted you to feel. Great.
Yeah, I like that analogy. The next question might be very quick for you guys. Let's see what you guys think. When do you go to ask for feedback? Let's say you're writing a novel, which you guys all are. At what point do you go? Do you ever worry, if I'm taking this too soon, is it going to interfere with your organic process of what book I would have written without receiving feedback? like take it chapter by chapter? Do you wait for, like Stephen King, like Paddy, you mentioned him, he usually waits for the end of draft 1, doesn't he? That's what he says.
I think so. It's been a while since I've read, but that sounds about right. I think he likes to keep everything shut away and in his head until he releases it to the world. And partly because the guy writes from intuition. I think he often doesn't have a plan. He's just writing as he goes. And feedback during that would really interrupt the sort of purity, I'm doing inverted commas here, in the air of the creative flow.
Nice. So when do you guys take it out? How soon?
I've just had a moment of realizing that I do it 2 different ways for my prose and my screenplays. I'm much more precious about my screenplays in that I do want a draft complete before I'll have eyes on it. I'd actually really hate someone looking at an incomplete screenplay draft in motion. I think that's because the pieces are a little bit smaller. So if I get to the end of the draft, I may still decide I'm going to jump back. I'm still tinkering with the start. Like it's not quite a linear process for me editing a screenplay. It's not done until it's done. So the idea that someone's reading the start while I'm still at the end, that's not correct. But with my prose, I have a habit of trying to get people in as soon as possible, almost for the opposite reason of it's such a long journey. I want to know as soon as possible if I'm off track. I don't want to get 60K down the road and be like, oh, I'm going to go back and change all that. I'd like to hear I'd like to see the red flags before I got too far towards the edge of the cliff.
Oh, so Boromir should die, not Aragorn. Okay.
I think there's an opposite to that, though, where sometimes you can have, at least this is what I've experienced, because I often get feedback very quickly because I want to know, I need to know if it's good. But there have been times where, like, so I'm halfway through writing this book of mine, and there's scenes that I think I might dump, but I'm already in the 3rd draft for a lot of those scenes because I've taken it to people and because I've actioned them. Whereas if I've just written it all through once, then I haven't had all this feedback that I've had to kind of nitpick at and work at. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
maybe.
For me, feedback is just kind of an intuitive honesty moment. For me, it's kind of the question I ask myself is usually, am I asking for feedback because I genuinely need outsider insight on the direction, or am I asking for feedback because I currently don't feel like writing, but I know what I need to do already? And then feedback becomes an avoidant technique to avoid addressing what I already know I need to address. Because sometimes that can be such an undertaking that it's like, oh, I don't want to have to outline all that and really like, this is where the work is. Like, this isn't just like free flow writing, like inspiration moment. This is like, okay, time for some heavy lifting. Like, this is where the discipline comes in. And sometimes those are the tempting moments to ask for feedback, either for an ego boost or for just some fresh take on maybe a scene you like to write more than another scene you have to write. So usually it's just a moment of reflection of like, do I have work ahead of me that I know I need to do, or do I actually need insight? And then if I do actually need insight to continue, then I do go for feedback.
Yeah, I try to have as much of the story written as possible before I go for feedback, because I will very quickly be taken away. I feel like I can be taken away with another idea if someone throws something my way, because that's the way that I write. So I'll be sitting down writing something, and as I'm going, I'm like, maybe I need another voice here. And then I instantly start making up what the relationship between these characters are, and it can completely change the shape of the story. So if I show someone chapter 1 of something that I'm in chapter 5 of, and they say, oh, I guess these 2 characters get together, I'm like, oh, wow, maybe they do get together. And that's just instantly gets into my head as if it was my idea. So I try to have enough of it there that I can't go back and undo it based on feedback necessarily.
That's fascinating. I've just had the epiphany that I'm probably the hard plotter in the room. So the idea that I'm inviting people in really early, that they would have to make a hell of an argument to steer me off what I already know my plot's going to be. I'm not so much working it out as I go. So I don't think I would be influenced in the same way you would be, James. But yeah, that makes sense.
True.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I feel like I need feedback to stop me from steering off what I plan. Like, I need someone to say, oh, this is nice. Oh, I was just gonna throw this behind the shed and bury it. I'm glad you said that. You might have saved this chapter's life. But so I need that constant validation that I should not rewrite my book. but yeah, it's nice to see how we take it different directions, very different directions. With that being said, the next one's gonna cut pretty deep. Take a deep breath, guys. What is the best, worst feedback you ever received? Like what?
Yeah.
What's the most painful comment that you absolutely
I've got it.
that helped you?
Yeah, I've got one too.
Got one as
Yeah.
well.
You look like you're ready.
Yeah, I have a friend who, just by accident, I'm not really sharing feedback with, not because of this, but so we were sharing feedback with each other for a little while back and forth. And then there's one scene I give him, and there's surprisingly little feedback on the document. Like, oh, that's interesting. Not much to say. I guess it's good. Keep going down, keep going down. Then there's 3 words in red. This is boring. It's like, And also, you don't know what to do with that feedback, because you didn't really elaborate on much. Like, I want to know what's boring. Is it all boring? Is it all bad? But kind of being left in the limbo of that is it's rough. I gotta say.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm still not actually sure what part of that scene was boring.
I was hoping for
Quote.
Constructive, tough
Yeah.
criticism, but
It's just bad feedback.
that's just
Quote.
Was it helpful in any way? I mean,
It's like Flight of the Conchords, where they're like, some people critique their rapping style, and they're like rapping about how they want people. They're like, why? Be more constructive with your feedback, please.
Yeah,
Why?
exactly. Or I guess a piece of advice for anyone listening is if you're leaving feedback, please elaborate a little bit. Please tell them in what way it is boring, and maybe the ways in which it could be made less boring. I think the writer would appreciate that.
It's just mean.
because saying it's boring is like, it's 50% of the work. I mean, thank you for enlightening me about the nature of my work, but I do need more. I do need you to tell me what didn't work for you. You recovered well, Paddy. You recovered well.
Eventually.
I got bad feedback, and then I got honest feedback. The bad feedback was from someone who I was sending work back and forth with, and he was sending me his work. And I didn't think his work was very good, but I was trying really hard to do like a constructive sandwich where I was finding 2 things I liked.
Explain what a constructive sandwich is.
For everything that you don't like, or for every problem that there is, you want to put in 2 things that you did like.
On either side of it, right? To
on either side of it, yeah. So that basically they end up with more constructive, they end up with more positive feedback than a negative feedback. And it was a real struggle. So I was just like counting down the things that I was like, what are the most pressing things that I need to point out? And can I find enough things I like about the work to address each of those? And if I can't, I'm just going to make something up, because it's better off to make up a piece of constructive feedback to point
always
out.
Fall back and just it's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah.
Really original take.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
The feedback that he gave me really messed with like my head and my direction that I was trying to take the story in. And it took me a long while to figure out what was wrong with, I guess, how he was interpreting what I was writing. He kind of took everything that I was saying literally and didn't understand that I was sort of trying to tell the story from the perspective of the character, and that I was trying to get across, this is how the character feels about the situation, and this is the tone I was creating. It was essentially kind of summed into one paragraph where the character was driving through an area that I was trying to communicate was dangerous, but the character felt safe in his car. And your man was just rewriting all of the sentences, as in like, it's actually like this. He's actually not safe, so it should be this way. And I was like, it's only that way if I'm specifically trying to tell the reader what it is, but I'm trying to communicate a few more things within the sentence. So this guy's feedback just completely derailed me, because I felt like I was not communicating what I was saying at all. It took me a long while to kind of come back and be like, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about, and kind of just take it my own way.
Wait. Was it ultimately good feedback though?
No.
Okay, did anyone receive terrible feedback that they're happy they received?
I did.
Phoenix, yes. Go ahead. Save this question, please.
It was this is actually a very formative moment, because this was very early in my writing career, and this was like, up until this point, I had more or less been working in a vacuum. I was like, it was my I'm gonna write sort of thing, and it was like I had a few stories under my belt at that time that I just not done much with, but whatever. But I finally had a story that I wanted to try to do something with, so I started like going to publishers and things like that. I went to writers conference that I've ended up going to a few times now. And I was sure, I'm like, this story is like pure magic. Like I am the next, I don't know. I'm a god in this community and people don't know. People just don't know it. People just don't know it yet, but I'm going to make them see. And like all these things, it was a children's book, or I thought it was. And then I'm like, all right, it's time. I'm going to an editor. This is the first time I'd used a professional editor. And she was like, she came back and she said, this is the editor I still use now. But like, she gave all this feedback and really great stuff. She liked the story, but she said, this is not a children's book. It's way too long. You're not following the standards and criteria of what children's books need. And you're not writing this story as though you're writing a children's book, essentially. She said it differently, but it completely, it was a humility moment. It was a identity moment. It was like, it was a big check on myself. And I took it all in, and it completely transformed everything because I took it in. I had to let go of what I like. I had to let go of my story and my ideas for it. And to be like, I don't know, it took a lot of honesty to be like, all right, if I want this, I can do something with this story, but it's not a children's book. So I have to let go of that to allow my writing to actually grow. I need to follow learn different techniques and standards. And yeah, it changed a lot. And it was a big up level moment for me.
Yeah, I've been trying to think of a specific anecdote to answer your question, Matan. I just know the feeling of when I get called on something and it's as if someone has articulated something I've known all along, but just haven't had the words for it. And it's like it's a bit of a brutal, like, oh, I should have known that, but thank you so much for saying it. Like so ultimately those are like, they're really good. I just can't think of a particular example I've had that, but I know that feeling when I'm just like, and I live for that feeling when someone can just like call me on my shit. And I'm just like, yes, you've articulated what's been bothering me in the back of my head. I just never quite knew it. Similar to James, all I can circle back to is a really formative, bad experience I had with feedback. And I'll share the story because it's kind of like got industry stuff and politics going on. It was a draft of my first feature film. And it was by the director who was attached to it at the time. And it was just before a meeting. The email was sent to me just before the meeting with all the feedback from the director. And it's just absolutely scathing. So it is not, the sentences he's putting into this email is not to be constructive at all. They're just telling me in all the ways the screenplay is not working. And I'm just going through this doom scroll of an email before the meeting where I'm meant to speak to this person and the producer. And it was just awful. I've had to have a cry, sort myself out, and then go into the meeting. But in hindsight, I was able to like know that the politic involved was this director was trying to push me off the script. So there was like a hidden agenda in that if they sent this public email saying how bad the script is, the script would be taken off me as the writer and they would be able to do their own pass of the
That's
script.
horrible.
Yeah, that was kind of the hidden agenda I was able to like work out later and be at peace with why it was that the feedback was structured that way. So in no way was it actually genuinely feedback, even though it was kind of received it that way at the time, in that I'm like, oh good, I was really looking forward to these notes because I'm looking forward to doing a next draft, and it's just nothing but this isn't working. I think
the moral of James and your experiences here is get a range of feedback. Get a lot. Don't just get one piece of feedback. Don't go to the same person. Get a broad range of different voices, because that'll give you more of an average for what the truth of your writing is.
And I did read this Twitter post just the other day that I had a bit of it ties back to this bad anecdote in that it's never take feedback from someone who doesn't like your manuscript. And it's this idea that someone's already coming in with not so much of an agenda, but if they don't know your genre, they don't like your genre, they don't like your work, there's no investment for them to actually try and help and be constructive. So you kind of want a base level beta or alpha reader who, one, likes what you're doing, and then they'll be your best audience in trying to help you get there to the vision of what it's actually meant to be.
Not quite. It's not a similar story, but it's just a story of having gotten good feedback from someone. I had been working on a short story for about a year and sending it around to friends and around to people I knew, and everyone came back and gave me positive feedback on the content, and they're like, this about the story, that about the story.
What was the story, James?
What was the story?
What was the story, James?
What was the story? We're like, is there a story we didn't get access to? Like, what is this?
It doesn't have a name.
I didn't want to put you on the spot. I was wondering if we'd read it or not.
No, you were trying to plug it. No, I haven't. The only time it was something.
Go ahead, James.
You're going to move on from that, yeah. It was I had just sent it around to some friends, and they all gave me positive feedback on it. And I gave it to someone who I was dating, and she read 2 or 3 pages of it and then kind of stopped and kind of like left it. And then I was kind of like, oh, what did you think of it? And she was like, there's no like internal information at all. And I was like, how do you mean? And she was like, there's no emotions, and I can't connect with the character at all. And I was like, oh, really? Because I've like got loads of thoughts and he's afraid. And she was like, yeah, but that's not like proper emotional reactions to all of the stuff that's happening. And I kind of just like hit a switch for me where I was like, there's a big difference between internal information of like thought and the character thinking about what they're doing and the actual internal reactions of the character throughout a scene. And that was a huge breaking point for me in terms of like my writing, where I just started to realize I had to start putting in different emotional responses and different reactions to every little thing that was happening, and then kind of deciding which of those were the most important and which weren't. But that was a big moment. And it was funny because everyone I'd sent it to maybe probably had the same thought, but didn't want to say it to me, or they didn't connect, but maybe they didn't know how to communicate why they weren't connecting with it. So yeah, just like as Paddy was saying, like getting a range of feedback from different people is absolutely essential.
So yeah, guys, if you're dating someone and you're on the fence and you're not sure if you should move forward with this relationship, just let them read your short story. And if they can't give you good feedback, they probably fail at other things. And no, I'm just kidding.
Watch them like a hawk while they're giving the feedback.
I would love. I got to take the opportunity to pitch another podcast episode where it's all our plus ones, and it's like dating a writer.
Oh my god,
dealing with their
guys,
shit.
Love Island, but just with fiction. Prose and yeah. Guys, let's do a lightning round. We're gonna do a lightning round before we move forward. Guys, we all want to get good feedback, but let's be honest. Half the job is on us. If we're not the right person to get good feedback, we're just not gonna get it. So I want a tip from each of you. How do you get people to give you good feedback? How do you make them comfortable to give you good feedback? Because some people, them, you don't want to give them good feedback because you can expect some certain responses, if you know what I mean. How do you make your readers, if there's any writer listening, how do you make your beta readers feel comfortable, or how do you direct them to give you the feedback that you need and not just nice, cool, interesting?
I got something often, and especially if it's someone who hasn't given me feedback before, and I don't know if they're just going to give you compliments for fear of hurting my feelings, I'll say, like, please tell me the things you like the least about it. Front load it with, like, tell me all the things that don't work. And they have permission to say what doesn't work. And I think that they know your expectation isn't just like validation. And that seems to have worked in the past. That's kind of my go-to for like first-time feedbackers.
I wish I was more strategic about it. I think the tools I use are maybe more subtle in the sense that when I'm talking to someone about my work, I try to be incredibly hard on my own work in the lead up conversation. And
that's good.
In that I try to always be my worst, harshest critic. And if they can hear me talking about how I like to pull it apart, how I will just shit on it, and it's almost putting them at ease and welcoming them into the conversation where they can be like, oh yeah, I thought that part was also shit. Like it just gives them permission.
Join me in shitting on my story.
Yeah. like maybe it wouldn't recommend this for everyone. And there's times where I need to go away and be like, all right, no, tell me it's good now. But just trying to make it nice and casual that they know they can use that language when talking about my story. And a lot of times the beta swaps I do with people is it's always awkward the first couple of times, but after a while, people will get a sense of the style of feedback like the notes I give them. And I try to be really clear that I'm like, I know I give a lot of notes. I know my notes are harsh, but it's because when I edit someone, I'm trying to hold myself to a professional standard. And I want them to know that it's a compliment that I'm not going to bullshit someone whenever I give notes. Like, I feel like my raw honesty and my time is the best compliment I could give your work. So I think once they've read the notes I give them after a couple of times, they're comfortable giving the same level of notes back to me. And that's where the good stuff is. I want to be torn apart. Because then I can either choose to ignore it or, actually make it better and it'll be great. But it's just getting a beta partner to that point and really comfortable with that kind of level of honesty. Yeah.
I really dig that approach. Basically treat others the way you want to be treated, which is true if you're exchanging feedback with other writers. My tip is really short. I would say don't argue with feedback. You don't have to accept it. But don't defend yourself. There's no point to defending yourself to your beta reader. Just take what they have to say. If you have to defend yourself, that should happen in your own head or when you're back editing. There's no point in trying to explain your story to someone. If you really want them to get it, just do the modifications and give it back to them. But there's no point to waste time and energy arguing.
That's such good advice.
That's a very good one.
Yeah. If it doesn't work on the page, there's no point in you explaining it afterwards because you can't be
Absolutely. Nice. Phoenix?
It's kind of in line with, I actually haven't even had to deal with like a new reader because I have access. Luckily, I'm at a point where I have access to a lot of readers who know what I'm looking for and aren't afraid to just say what's up. So it would be kind of like what Ali said. It is a relationship that you're building, and chances are you'll get way better feedback on your second round of editing once someone like maybe they're being all nice and then they slip one kind of critique one in there, and when they see that that's the bit of feedback you're most excited about, that's like a huge permission piece for the next time. Be like, ooh, I'll give them a lot of that. Another thing is like, give them examples of what sort of things you are wanting specifically. Like be brutally honest is a general thing, but then you could also say tell me if it's confusing. Do you understand it? This scene does you get does it flow, or like things like that. You could give examples of kind of things you're wanting. Also, if I do highly recommend at some point in your career, to everyone listening, it is very valuable to hire a professional editor at some point, because these are people that are trained to dissect stories. If you want good feedback and you know that the editor is highly appraised, they will not you will avoid what Paddy went through with this is boring. They'll say this. They'll tell you this is this and this is why it is this, and what you should look at, what you should think about. They know what makes a story jump off a page versus just reading words, and they'll help you get that. As well as it's a professional transaction, they will they're paid to be honest for you and break down your story as best as they can to you. So it's worth doing, even if you don't do it often. Just doing it once just to kind of see where you're at. It's a great tool.
I'll just conclude before we go to do the reading. While we all mentioned the need to be brutal and honest, it is okay to enjoy the positive feedback. We are doing a very tough thing to try to write, and it's fine to sometimes just bask in the compliments. It doesn't make you a bad writer. It doesn't make you a shallow person. It's okay to someone just enjoy a bit of feedback that is just, I loved it. There's nothing wrong. You don't have to force the person to tell you that the story is crappy. Okay. Try to balance it. Thank you guys so much for answering. We got something really cool coming up. We got a reading from our very own Phoenix, right? What do you have for us, young man?
Yeah. So, young man. Let me just pull it up. So this is a piece that I'm reading because it was one that I actually worked on in a workshop with a couple other writers, and an editor was in the workshop with us, and it was a small group. It was just me and two other writers and this editor. And the whole point of it wasn't, I don't even know if you would count it as a workshop, but it was like a 4 or 5 hour thing. And she read our work, we read each other's work, and then we would go off, break out and work, and then come back and she would read them again. And it was active feedback and response. It was a very live feedback session. And my story dramatically transformed during that time. And the editor, during that time, the editor even voiced that she was like amazed with how much I ran with the feedback she gave initially. So the story dramatically changed in the matter of a few hours. I'm not going to read too much just because it is a children's book. So I think technically meeting our word limit, I would just read the whole story, but I don't want to do that because that doesn't feel as good. But the story is called Meeting a Phoenix, and I'll just read the first few pages. Jason was a phoenix hunter. He'd never found one, but there were lots of things he hadn't done. He couldn't reach the kitchen cupboard, but he could if he stood on a chair. He had also never met his father, who had died at sea before Jason was born, but his mom told great stories about him. She spoke of ships arriving home, shooting off firecrackers that glimmered like phoenixes across the summer sky. And so Jason's mind was set. He was a phoenix hunter, and on their summer camping trip that year, he was determined to meet a phoenix. Can I go explore? Jason asked before the car stopped. After we unpack, honey, and stay close enough to hear me singing. Bags unloaded, Jason crunched down the path, and before long, something caught his attention. A feather glowing like sunlight. Jason's mind filled with magnificent fiery birds and the smell of the sea. A great start, he thought. He was off. And I'll actually leave it there. And the thing that I want to highlight is just like the feedback that I did get on this. First of all, was the name of the main character. His name was not Jason. His name used to be Felix. And the editor was just like, I love the wordplay, but Felix does not roll off the tongue. It's not easy to read. I would recommend changing the name. So I did. And the other thing was like, it was unclear what the relationship of the father was to the Phoenix itself. It felt like I had two stories running parallel that didn't quite marry to each other. So the big revamps I did were in the first few pages, where I heavily associated the sensations that Jason was getting around phoenixes with the relationship with his father, so that as the story progresses, his relationship with the phoenix is directly tied with his relationship to not knowing his father, and it brings it all in.
We've heard the previous draft of this, at least I think all of us have, and I don't remember the stuff at the firecrackers in the previous draft, and the linking with Phoenix. That's a really good idea. That was a good thing to add. Thank you.
Yeah, when I got that bit in, I had like an internal like yes to myself. Like I was like, that's the path. Like that's the right route. It felt good.
It's amazing to see how much thought goes into every single sentence in those children's books. It's really amazing. Feedback would be absolutely essential with those things. Thank you so much, guys. We're going to finish with a quote brought to you by Paddy.
I have a quote.
And before that, I just want to say thank you, guys, for your beautiful participation and sharing all these amazingly tragic stories.
I have a quote by Doc Rivers. I don't know who this is, but Matan does.
I do know who it is. Doc Rivers, championship winning coach. Yeah, I'll
there we go. This is actually a sports quote, not a writing quote, but I think the advice still applies. Doc Rivers said, "Average players want to be left alone. Good players want to be coached. Great players want to be told the truth." And that is Doc Rivers.
Amen.
And that applies because you have to be able to accept feedback. That's absolutely crucial. You can't be a writer without feedback.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. Happy Easter, happy Passover, happy Ramadan, and have a beautiful week. Nice to see you as always.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.